All right, hello everyone, and welcome to NLGJA, the Association of LGBTQ Journalists 2023 National Convention. Thank you to everyone for joining us here at the Authors Café, and hello to everyone who is joining us from home. We are streaming live on YouTube and on our convention microsite. So we have a couple presenters here today who are going to share their recent publications. We're very excited to hear from them all. So each author is going to do a short reading from their book. Some others will give a short presentation. Each author is going to speak for about 10 minutes. That includes some questions, some time for questions and answers. So please help yourself to the refreshments that we have in the back and be respectful and active listeners. So to start off, please join me in welcoming our first presenter, Bryn Pellot. Bryn Pellot is Taboo Media's co-founding director and the editor of the Queer Activism Anthology series. He is based in Cape Town, South Africa, where he occasionally freelances for international news and media outlets. So please, welcome Bryn.
Morning, everyone. Thanks, Claire. So I was at the NLGJA last in 2019 in New Orleans, and we actually have 3 new books since then. I'm not going to talk about all 3 or read all 3 or take up 30 minutes, but basically during lockdown we started a queer activist anthology, and you'll see there's just some images scrolling through of some of the art in the anthology. So Taboom, we basically work with journalists and with human rights defenders to improve news media coverage of queer issues all around the world. And because I'm based in South Africa and I was there during lockdown, we had quite a strict lockdown in South Africa, all of the work was happening there. So it was Taboom and Gala Queer Archive in Johannesburg. We had a media advocacy workshop, and it was supposed to be in person. We were supposed to bring everyone together, but with COVID that couldn't happen. So we were able to actually create this first anthology just from some leftover funds that we had and redirect it towards these storytelling workshops. So the very first one, it's called Hopes and Dreams That Sound Like Yours. This one, the subtitle is Stories of Queer Activism in Sub-Saharan Africa. And it features stories from 21 activists all around Sub-Saharan Africa, who work mostly as communications officers or executive directors of small or large queer-focused organizations around the continent, and basically just telling the stories of how they came into this space, how they came into this work. Many of the stories are very personal, and because it was lockdown, a lot of them do address some of the themes of isolation, of overcoming discrimination and abuse, and some of the things that people were facing at the time and throughout their lives. The first one is quite uplifting deliberately because we were all in such a dark place at that time with COVID. And then the second one that we published last year, the first one we published on Idahobit, the International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, Intersex, Transphobia. The second one's called Courage to Share. So we're moving away from hopes and dreams to really emphasizing the strength that it takes to share these stories. And in this anthology, which also it features all of the art, you're actually seeing it in order from the first book through the last. So the art on the screen at the moment is from the second anthology. Which each story that was finished, it went through sort of a mentor editing process. So we had 5 mentor editors from around the continent who worked with the storytellers to sort of finalize, refine their stories. And then that draft was sent to queer and ally illustrators all over the continent, who then interpreted the stories based on the themes, based on the people's images in some cases, sometimes not because of issues of anonymity and safety. But then you see all these beautiful images came out. So this story features 28 stories, and then the very final one, which I actually only have the proof copy of because we just published it a few weeks ago and we just got the proof. It's called Whispers and Shouts. So in this one, the geographic focus actually expands to the whole continent, so including North Africa as well. So there's a story from Morocco and from Algeria in this one. And this came out of the very first in-person workshop we were able to have with activists, just given no more COVID restrictions. The travel restrictions in South Africa were quite severe until we were able to do this one. So in May 23, 23 activists gathered. And basically, here you see the cover here. And these are all the stories from the new anthology. We're able to work on their stories in person with mentor editors, with each other, and just kind of get this network up and running, and this family of support and community that's come out of this. So yeah, I encourage everyone to pick up one of these. I've got postcards of some of the prints that you're welcome to come and take a few from all of the anthologies here. And often when we have launches, we did a launch at the Zeitz-Mocha Museum in Cape Town, the Museum of Contemporary Art, and at a local gallery, we had the art hung up, and we almost like treated these like trading cards. Everyone had a few, and then we used them also in that social way to kind of encourage people to get to know one another. So yeah, I think I'm running out of time based on the presentation speed. Are there any questions that anyone has about the anthologies? I'll say briefly, so we've published 3. Now we have a 4th one coming next year, and then we'll be doing language-specific ones with translators in Kiswahili, Portuguese, and Arabic to sort of better serve more parts of the continent. The second 2 anthologies are in English and French, and some of the authors wrote their stories in French and then were translated into English and vice versa. So once the 4 are done, then we'll be looking to do this kind of work in other regions and other places around the world too. And I know there's been some spin-off efforts from the first 3. There's talks in Namibia and in Lesotho to do sort of a country-specific one. So we're also trying to encourage groups to just like take this idea and run with it, because we made it up collaboratively. I think there were about 40 people involved in the first one, probably 50 in each one after that. And everything we publish is under a Creative Commons license, so everything's free to share. And we really encourage everyone to share these. We've gotten them into many archives and libraries, like queer libraries around the continent, especially through Gala, our partner. And we have them in schools. Gala has an education outreach, so they're getting them into South African schools and having dialogues based on them, having readings. There's a lot that can be done with these. So yeah, it's an exciting project, and one that we hope we see replicated in different parts of the world, and we're trying to work on that now. So that's me. Any questions? Yes?
There's at least a perception that queerness and the continent do not meet.
Mm.
And we know the political, legal, et cetera, situation in many of the countries. How do you all navigate that with such an expressly queer product?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I mentioned that some of these are in schools in South Africa, which I think might not even be allowed in a lot of states in the US, from what I understand. There is this perception, and you hear it and you see it in Uganda with the new law that was passed and similar laws that are being pushed in Kenya and Tanzania, that being queer is un-African, amoral, ungodly, irreligious. And the point of these stories is to show, like, people telling their own stories in their own voices, like, we're here, we exist, this is our story. Some of us are Christian, some of us are Muslim, some of us had to leave faith communities because of the persecution we were facing. But essentially, like, the authors are saying, we exist, we are African, we are queer, and it's getting that out into the world and into the public. And then a lot of the authors are actually interviewed in local media, which has been helpful. But there's a lot of censorship that happens, certainly. And that's why we work with activists and journalists, and we try to bring them together, because journalists often don't know where to start, or they have the wrong ideas or the wrong terminology. It's just about sensitization in many cases and overcoming biases. And with the activists, it's about getting their voice out. So even like in Uganda, I did a report recently, we saw that media coverage had actually improved since the 2014 bill until now, but still, and it was amazing that queer voices were being featured in many local newspapers, but it was only the heads of organizations. It was not just ordinary queer people telling their daily stories. So that's something that really needs to change, and that's a big part of why this exists.
Hi, can I ask a follow-up question to that, just related to banning of books and things like that? Is that something you encounter?
Oh, I'm sorry, about banning books?
Banning books, because that's really popular here in the U.S. right now.
Yeah, I haven't heard so much. I mean, there's a lot of censorship that happens. It certainly happens. Like, In Kenya, there's the Kenya Film Censorship Board that bans queer books. In Nigeria, there's similar things that have happened. In South Africa, the media freedom space is pretty open, so that's why I think Gala is able to do the work that it does, our partner, in terms of getting the books in many places. So we haven't faced that. But also maybe it helps that we're not, these can be for sale, and they are in some bookshops, but because we're distributing them for free, I think it helps us circumvent some of the license. And anyone can just go to our website and download it. So that helps too. A lot of the books are shared via email, via WhatsApp, so it's kind of easy to overcome the censorship when we don't have the financial considerations because the work was supported by grants that we have. So we're able to look beyond that understandable financial consideration a lot of authors have. Anything else? I think that's probably my time. Thank you all so much. And then, yeah, come see me if you want one of these, a few of these postcards. I've got quite a few.
All right. Thank you so much, Brian. That was wonderful. Next up, we have Kristina Marusic. Kristina is an award-winning journalist at the Environmental Health Sciences who covers environmental health and justice at ehn.org and dailyclimate.org. She is based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Kristina is going to be discussing with us her new book, A New War on Cancer, The Unlikely Heroes Revolutionizing Prevention. Thank you, Kristina.
Hi, thank you. My younger sister was diagnosed with thyroid cancer when she was 25 years old, which is very young for a cancer diagnosis. And we're close in age. I was 27 at the time, and I was actually living abroad, teaching English, trying to decide whether I wanted to stay for a while where I was in Taiwan or come home. And when my sister got her diagnosis, I decided to come home. I moved to Pittsburgh, where I still live, and I actually moved in with her to be with her throughout her treatment and help her out. And at the time, her doctors told us that thyroid cancer typically runs in families, but no one else in our family had ever had it, and no one has ever had it since then. And I'm also an investigative reporter, and so I got to Googling about that when they mentioned that it was kind of rare for just one person. And I learned that thyroid cancer is also sensitive to chemical exposures and exposures in the environment that can increase our cancer risk. But when we asked her doctors about that and we tried to do research, we just had a hard time finding much information that was useful or insightful. And so I was still thinking about that a few years later when, for my job, I wrote a series of stories on cancer and the environment in Pittsburgh, focused on our ongoing problems with industrial air pollution there, and disproportionately higher than state and national average rates of certain types of cancer, including thyroid cancer. And I wrote a 5-part series exploring the role of these kinds of exposures in our cancer rates in the region. And this series won a couple of awards, and I got a very nice note from a publisher afterwards congratulating me on the awards and asking if I'd be interested in turning this reporting series effectively into a book with a national focus. So 4 incredibly long years later, this is that book. My book came out in May. And so while I was researching the book and while I was writing that investigative series, I learned some things that were really shocking to me. And the first was that since we started tracking cancer rates in a kind of uniform way at the global level in the 1970s, we have seen rates of cancer in both children and young adults, like my sister, steadily increase. And that's true in the United States, but also at the global level. When you look at the charts, they're just diagonal lines across the page. That's also true for a handful of other cancer types, with really clear links in the scientific literature to environmental exposures. So things like multiple myeloma, testicular cancer, and non-Hodgkin lymphoma. And some of those increases are even bigger, like up in the 75% increase range. Childhood cancer is like a 35% increase. So this book really is an exploration of why that's happening and who is working to change it. and what the rest of us can do to help out. So this is a really kind of heavy, intense subject matter, and it can feel a little overwhelming. The focus is on the ways that we're exposed to cancer-causing chemicals in our everyday lives through our substances in our drinking water and our food and our personal care products. But the book is really focused on solutions. So it's focused on people who've dedicated their lives and their careers to tackling this problem, some of the victories they've had that have made us all safer that most of us don't even know about, and then how we can join this movement to make sure we're all safer and protected from these chemicals in our everyday lives. I remember to pack everything I could possibly need for this conference except a copy of my book, which I realized halfway on the drive here from Pittsburgh I left at home. So I'm going to do a brief reading, and I'll read from a PDF. Apologies for that. How much time do I have? Okay, perfect. On an 80-degree day that followed a week of snow in late April 2021, I met Barry Breen at a coffee shop in Pittsburgh. She came directly from a hike in a nearby park. Her tank top and neon orange sports bra left the port in her chest exposed, a knotty lump above her left breast. Her frame was slight, and she wore no makeup, aside from delicately penciled-in eyebrows. We sat on the cafe's shaded patio, sipping cold drinks and marveling over how the sudden shift in weather had changed everyone's mood. People grinned and greeted strangers in a kind of collective exuberance about swapping out coats and boots for shorts and summer dresses overnight, and finally feeling the warmth of the sun for the first time after a long pandemic-addled winter. A journalist colleague who was friends with Barry had connected us, knowing I was writing a book about environmental exposures and cancer. He thought I should hear her story. It was our first meeting, and Barry seemed a little nervous, which she compensated for by talking. I quickly learned that she grew up in Oil City, about 93 miles northeast of Pittsburgh, that Barry was her grandmother's maiden name, that she occasionally meets other women named Barry, B-A-R-I, but had only met one other Barry, B-E-R-R-Y, and that strangely they'd both worked at the same grocery co-op nearby. Barry is an artist, a painter, and a musician, and she works as a realtor to supplement her income. She has a half-sister who's 12 years older than she is, and a brother who's 15 months older. She lives at the top of one of Pittsburgh's many hills with a roommate she describes as a chill hippie, meditating, sober, likes to cook. We discovered that we're just 4 days apart in age, both born in March 1984, and she told me that this March, just before her 37th birthday, she'd had surgery to remove a cancerous tumor from her right breast, and then she'd lost 20 pounds and most of her hair while undergoing chemotherapy. Between sips of tea, she showed me the scar from her lumpectomy, a thin red line beneath her right armpit. She also showed me her new hair, taking off her hat and running her fingers over the short brown and gray fuzz that coated her scalp. In September 1993, more than 500 people gathered in downtown Boston for the city's third annual Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition March. After the walk, event organizers asked anyone who'd experienced breast cancer to step inside a large outline of the state of Massachusetts that they'd painted on the ground. Suddenly, the shape was full of bodies, bandanas or headscarves covering heads that were bald from chemo. People cried and clung to their spouses or children. With all of these pink ribbons everywhere, it's hard to believe now that not long ago, breast cancer was a hidden disease. Julia Brody, the executive director of Silent Spring Institute, a breast cancer prevention research nonprofit, told me in 2020. In the 90s, women were just beginning to talk about their experiences publicly and connect with other women who'd had the disease. For many of the women at that rally, this was the first time they'd ever publicly acknowledged that they'd had breast cancer. It was an incredibly emotional experience seeing that they weren't alone. At the time, the mortality rate from breast cancer was around 31 deaths per 100,000 people in the US, significantly higher than the current mortality rate of 20 per 100,000. The National Breast Cancer Coalition, including the Massachusetts chapter that sponsored the march, circulated a petition urging President Bill Clinton to develop a national strategy to address the disease. I take care of women with breast cancer every day, and I've seen too many patients die. Dr. Susan Love, one of the founders of the National Breast Cancer Coalition, told the Boston Globe reporter who covered the march in 1993, "We have to be so obnoxious that they cure this disease just to get rid of us." That plea was effective. Over the next decade, Congress allocated hundreds of millions of dollars for breast cancer research, and mortality rates dropped by about 24%. but a quieter, parallel movement was also being launched at the same time, one aimed at stopping breast cancer before it started. The Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition had been active since 1991, but 93 was the first year the state had ever published cancer rates by town. The report revealed that 9 towns on Cape Cod had significantly higher rates of breast cancer than the state average. The group called for a scientific investigation into why, but they were frustrated by the lack of existing laboratories capable of performing the investigation. So with a few $1 million in funding from the Massachusetts legislature, they founded their own, bringing in scientists with diverse expertise. They named it Silent Spring Institute in honor of Rachel Carson, whose groundbreaking 1962 book, Silent Spring, brought national attention to the dangers posed by pesticides, effectively launching the modern environmental movement. Carson died of breast cancer 2 years after her book came out. They were really a remarkable, visionary group of women, Julia said. Now, they say they were naive at the time and didn't realize how hard that kind of investigation was going to be, but that's lucky. If they had, they never would have achieved so much. I'll end there. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kristina, for that powerful presentation. Next up, we have Tre'vell Anderson. Tre'vell Anderson is an award-winning journalist, noted podcast host, and authoress doing world-changing work around society and culture. Tre'vell will be presenting their latest book, We See Each Other, a Black trans journey through TV and film. Welcome, Tre'vell.
Hello, everyone. Tre'vell Anderson, I use they, them pronouns. As she mentioned, I wrote We See Each Other, a Black trans journey through TV and film. It came out in May. It is part memoir, part history of trans images on screen through a wholly Black lens. It is, well, what I'll do is I'm gonna read a portion from my introduction that kind of sets up my story and the story of the book. And happy to take any questions if there are any afterwards. Okay. I don't remember exactly when I was taught to hate myself. Maybe it was overhearing family members talk disparagingly about women who looked like men and guys who just want to be a woman, their gender ignorance and latent homophobia and transphobia becoming mine. Maybe it was in middle school when, for crisscross day, some of the other boys and I wore dresses and wigs instead of simply wearing our clothes backward like everyone else. We thought we were so clever, and we were. I also wore a 2-inch heel I had borrowed from my mom's closet, a fact she'll first learn about while reading this book. My classmates were shocked and entertained and seemed to have whatever confirmation they were waiting for that I was gay, though I never responded to their prodding. Or maybe it was earlier, like in elementary school when an uncle punched me in the chest as punishment for standing with a limp wrist one too many times. It stole the wind and the joy out of me. I look back on these moments now, remembering them as violent or ridiculous or both, but these lessons on how to be, or more often than not, how not to be, were as casual and everyday as brushing my teeth. It was ordinary to be told in ways large and small that the growing desires of my gender-expressive soul were wrong and an abomination. I can't say for sure when I learned to be transphobic, or homophobic for that matter, but I know media had a lot to do with it. Sure, my socially conservative family, my granny who helped raise us when my mom was overseas in the Army was a pastor, had its influence, and the threats of fire and brimstone were beyond persuasive enough to keep me on the straight and narrow. But film and television were my escape, my portal through which a world of possibilities of what life could be and look like became real. For many of us, media signals life from worlds beyond. Like energy readings on distant planets, the people and characters we see on screens large and small become glimmers of a humanity and lived experience we perhaps didn't know about prior. A quick survey of the media landscape, however, presents a stark reality when it comes to the representation of transgender and gender-expansive communities. And if the cultural productions that have been created thus far are to be our teachers, a record of art and life and existences that came before us, the text at hand is incomplete and flawed, like unseasoned chicken. It is the oppressor who, more often than not, writes our collective histories. Or perhaps it's better to say that it's the histories written by oppressors that come to represent a people's prevailing understanding of itself. Those written by the oppressed being banned and burned because the real, true tea is just too hot. But the oppressed always find a way, or we make one. I first thought about writing a book about trans images on screen in 2015. I was working at the Los Angeles Times as a reporter in the entertainment section, which they call calendar. Though my main responsibilities involved covering movies, by this time I'd already carved out my own much more expansive beat, diversity in Hollywood with a focus on Black and queer film. Months before the season 2 premiere of Transparent, I had this idea to create a fairly comprehensive timeline of trans representation on screen. I forget the exact thing that got me interested in this project, but it was the same year that Caitlyn Jenner became perhaps the most famous trans person in the world, after Laverne Cox's historic Time cover ushered in the quote-unquote transgender tipping point, and before actress Daniela Vega of Una Mujer Fantástica became the first openly transgender person in history to be a presenter at the Academy Awards ceremony. I remember searching for a resource like this online and coming up empty, and every time I came up empty, the one person I knew would have some insight was Nick Adams, GLAAD's director of trans representation. For over 2 decades, Nick's been silently steering Hollywood in his professional capacity, advising on scripts, supporting casting efforts, and holding folks accountable for their foolishness. When I reached out to him, he provided me with a list of what seemed like every trans person or character who had a meaningful presence on screen, films and television shows, scripted and otherwise. Some of them I was super familiar with, like Isis King's reality TV stints, or that singular episode of The Jeffersons titled Once a Friend, where one of George's Navy buddies has transitioned. Others, like Ed Wood's Glenn or Glenda from 1953, or The World According to Garp from 1982, were news and new to me. With this information, I created the timeline, one where audiences can toggle options to only show them films, documentaries, reality shows, or scripted series. It was and is one of my favorite things that I helped bring to life, largely because I found it to be a rejoinder to sentiments that made it seem like trans people dropped out of the sky when Laverne's historic Time cover was released in 2014. That felt like, and still feels like, the prevailing idea robbing us as a community of our history and providing justification for the ignorant and hateful to further shun, oppress, and disappear us. Because it's a lot easier to look the other way when we're discriminated against and killed if you feel like we're not your neighbor or local nail tech and are just figments of a Hollywood writer's room. Somebody needs to put this in a book, I thought casually at the time. Fast forward a couple years, during which my own gender journey bank had bounced its way further toward my truth, and I filmed my interview for Sam Feder's pioneering documentary on trans media representation, Disclosure, which you can check out on Netflix, although we hate them, all of which I detail throughout the pages to come. And the thought came back to me as I contemplated a host of ideas for what my first book could be. By this point, trans folks were even more visible in film and television than when I made the initial timeline, and my relationship to those images had changed. Having now grown into my transness, building a more meaningful relationship to and with the images of my community feels important, even vital. 3 more paragraphs, I swear. Now here is where I'm supposed to explicitly state what I want you to take away from these pages. I'm supposed to say that I hope this book causes you to think deeply about the ways our culture has rendered, quite problematically, trans lives on screen, and especially how those renderings manifest in the acts of violence and traumas committed against trans folks in real life. I'm supposed to say that I hope my personal stories humanize a trans experience for someone out there who might not know or care that they know a trans person, this book being an antidote or cure for their hate. I'm supposed to say I hope this book becomes a useful tool in the fight for liberation and that promised land we say we want. And I do hope for all of the above, especially for those of you not Black and trans. But really, I wrote this book to document my journey of coming into myself alongside the trans and trans-related images on screen that factored into it, because I wanted to show people like me what our history of visibility looks like when one of us is telling the story. I wanted to show what I have experienced and embodied and witnessed, how I have had to make myself out of the scraps and shreds, the slivers and whispers of representation on screen. Because I recognize that while visibility can be a tawdry thing, it can also be, and has been time and time again, a radical act in the face of the isms and phobias of our society that have led many to believe that we are aberrations, that we are glitches in the matrix of life that must be managed, killed, and erased at all costs. So, this is the transcestry of my making, and in reading what I have documented, I hope that you, the Black trans reader, see yourself in slices of your transcestry. I hope that in centering myself, you feel centered because indeed, we see and are seen by each other. And for the rest of y'all who read this book, not Black or trans or non-binary, you're welcome. That's it. Thank you.
right, thank you so much, Tre'vell. That was fantastic. Next up, we are going to be hearing from Mike DeSocio. Mike DeSocio is an award-winning independent journalist telling stories about cities, climate change, and the LGBTQ plus community. Welcome, Mike. Mike will be discussing Morally Straight, how the fight for LGBTQ inclusion changed the Boy Scouts and America.
Thank you so much. Like she said, my name is Mike DeSocio. I'm an independent journalist, and I wanted to tell you about this book today because I think a lot of you probably think you already know this story. The fight over gay membership, specifically in the Boy Scouts, was something that dominated news coverage for the better part of a decade. But I want to take you back a little bit further than that. Before there was a policy battle, before there was a Supreme Court battle, in fact, before there even was a policy about gay people in the Boy Scouts. So this was the year 1978. The Boy Scouts were in kind of a tricky place, a tough spot back in the 70s. They were losing membership really quickly. They were trying to figure out how to maintain cultural relevance. They were really struggling to attract a new generation into the program. But there was one young boy who they really didn't need to struggle to attract at all. He was an 8-year-old living in suburban New Jersey, and his name was James Dale. Dale joined the Cub Scouts as early as he possibly could. He was following his older brother and his father into the program, and he loved it right from the start. His Cub Scout pack met at a local elementary school just around the corner from where he grew up. But if you took that road just about a half hour further north to North Brunswick, New Jersey, you could actually find the Boy Scouts of America National Headquarters. And that very same year that James Dale joined the Cub Scouts in 1978, leaders in that office complex were passing a new policy, and they were passing it very quietly. The policy would prohibit anyone who was openly gay from being a member or a volunteer in the Scouts. And this was one of the last policies that the Boy Scouts would pass at this headquarters because just the following year in 1979, they pulled up their tent stakes and relocated to Dallas, Texas, where they remain today. But in the same year that they were relocating, things were changing in New Jersey. The state had just decriminalized homosexuality, and it was one in a domino of 17 states that had done the same. The end of the 70s kind of marked new momentum for the gay rights movement, but at the same time, it had inspired some fierce backlash, not unlike what we're seeing today. And so it was in this environment that the Boy Scouts decided to quietly pass this new policy. But young James Dale had no way of knowing any of this, and not just because he was 8 years old, but also because the Boy Scouts did not communicate this policy, not even to its own membership, until almost a decade later in the 1990s, more than a decade later. By this point, James Dale was an Eagle Scout. He had become kind of a model of the program, shown off to people all around the state as kind of a success of scouting. And he had also become a freshman at Rutgers University, where he started to embrace his identity as a gay man for the first time. He even became co-president of the Gay Alliance on campus, but he still remained actively involved in scouting. He would go back on weekends, volunteer on camping trips, help out with the younger kids, up until the point where his two parallel worlds collided. James Dale was quoted in a newspaper article in one of the largest daily newspapers in the state, and local leaders at his Boy Scout Council saw the article and promptly sent him a letter revoking his membership. When he received it, he was really confused and devastated. He had spent his entire life in the program, and he didn't actually know why he was being kicked out. So he sent a letter back and asked, and the Boy Scouts were happy to tell him that it was because of this policy, the one that he did not even know existed, the one that was rubber stamped the same year he joined the Cub Scouts, and that was the one banning gay members. But James didn't want to simply let this lie. He fought in the courts in New Jersey for 10 years to gain back his membership, and he eventually landed it in the Supreme Court in 2000. Along the way, he started a really kind of different national conversation about gay people that forced Americans to think of them as upstanding citizens, as Eagle Scouts, as people who could easily be your neighbor or your colleague. And despite that cultural progress, he still lost in the Supreme Court. the Boy Scouts won their constitutional right to discriminate against anyone that they wanted to as a private organization. And after this happened, the movement pretty much completely died out for a decade. That is until 2011, when there was another Eagle Scout, although straight, named Zach Walls, who kind of became something of a celebrity in the gay rights movement for a speech that he gave supporting gay marriage in the state of Iowa. Zach was raised by lesbian moms, and he wanted to show himself as an example that gay people could raise successful kids. His testimony went viral on YouTube, it gained millions of views, landed him on the Ellen Show, and just around the same time, the Boy Scout story was starting to come back as well. A lesbian mother in a small town in Ohio named Jennifer Terrell had been kicked out of her Cub Scout unit for being gay, and it kind of spurred the first news cycle about gay membership in the Scouts in over a decade. And so Zach realized that he could use his platform to help, and so he teamed up with Jennifer Terrell and others to form an organization called Scouts for Equality. This is the part of the story that most of you are probably more familiar with. To grossly oversimplify, Scouts for Equality used online petitions and grassroots organizing to really force the Boy Scouts' hand on this matter, and in a matter of a few years, won the inclusion of gay boys, then gay men, and eventually trans boys and even cisgender girls as well. And as it stands today, the Scouts are actually open to kids of all genders and sexualities, which might surprise some of you. And so my book, Morally Straight, tells the story of all of these kind of battles and many more. I used kind of original reporting and interviews to braid together this collective struggle, one where a lot of people who never intended to be activists made really great sacrifices to change the rights that gay people and trans people held in society. It also includes my own story as a queer Eagle Scout, and I'm really excited for this book to be out in the world. It's going to be published in the summer of 2024. It's available for pre-order. There's a link in QR code, and I'm happy to take any questions if I have some time. Yeah, please.
I used to be a high school teacher, and one of my students was an Eagle Scout, and I noticed that probably within a month of the Scouts announcing they were accepting, everybody's identity, that within a matter of weeks, he came out. And he had obviously been wrestling with this, that the most important thing in his life could not be reconciled with the most important organization in his life.
Right.
And it was like he was free. Have you found any evidence, because I sound like a geek, that in doing that, in the Scouts basically saying everyone is welcome, you hear all these narratives of like, this group no longer wants to host them. I know in Utah, they basically are like, we're going to start our own version of the Boy Scouts because you can't do that. Have you found evidence that there are people like my former student that are, no, I finally get to be myself where I want to be myself, and that actually is more of a narrative?
Yeah, there's a ton of anecdotal evidence for that. I mean, my own story is kind of proof of that. I grew up in scouting in like the 2010s basically, so I didn't really come out myself until after the policy changed. Like that exactly happened to me, and I have friends who had to leave the program for 10, 20 years, and then when the policy changed, came right back, and some of them are now leading the diversity, equity, and inclusion work that's happening in the organization. So I hear that really all the time, that people kind of came back home once they were allowed to do so.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone.
All right. right, thank you so much, Mike. That was wonderful. Next up, we're going to be hearing from Curtis Chin. Curtis is a co-founder of the Asian American Writers Workshop in New York City. He serves as the nonprofit's first executive director as well. He went on to write for network and cable television before transitioning to social justice documentaries. Curtis is going to be discussing his book, Everything I Learned in a Chinese Restaurant. So please, welcome Curtis.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for inviting me here to NLGJA. It's my first time here, so I'm very excited to meet everybody. I'm going to be reading a little excerpt from my upcoming book. It's called Everything I Learned in a Chinese Restaurant, and it's coming out from Little Brown on October 17th, and recently it's been named to best or most anticipated books by Time Magazine, Washington Post, San Francisco Chronicle, Goodreads, and a whole bunch of other places. And so I'm really excited to get this out there. The book is my memoir about growing up in Detroit in the 80s. It was a very tough time period for my hometown at that time. Not only did we have high unemployment because of the auto industry, but we had crack, cocaine, we had AIDS. I personally knew 5 people that were murdered by the time I was 18 years old. But despite this, we had this really awesome Chinese restaurant that my family ran in the inner city, and where my parents were able to teach us life lessons, in terms of how to navigate, and actually move beyond those 4 walls of that Chinese restaurant. And so the book is structured into 3 different sections of 8 stories each, because 888 is good luck to Chinese people. There are 8 stories in elementary, middle school, 8 in high school, and then 8 in college. And it's really about how I navigated that space, the intersectional space. So I'm going to read, I hope that it fits within 10 minutes. Okay, but if that, short ended. Okay, so this is actually from the first section when I'm a little middle schooler. So, okay. Everything I learned in a Chinese restaurant. Chapter 6. In Detroit, the Motown sound was everywhere, and in my mind, the one and only Diana Ross reigned supreme. Her sweet, youthful voice, combined with her radiant smile, served as an inspiration to me. In addition to sharing Chinese zodiac signs, the year of the monkey, we were from the same area. The international superstar had grown up blocks from the restaurant in the Brewster Douglas housing projects, the largest government-subsidized housing in Michigan. Though Ross's label, Motown Records, had abandoned the city a decade ago, I used to fantasize that one day the singer would make a splashy return and we'd share an order of egg rolls in our front booth. When I reached 7th grade, Diana's hit I'm Coming Out came bursting on the airwaves. It's like everybody should know that song, right? Like I go to straight audiences and some have never heard that song. But anyway, I was 12 and the term coming out was new to me. I'd never heard it before. I thought it was cool, but I didn't think it had anything to do with being gay or lesbian. The lyrics were more universal. The song championed personal freedom and independence. I could definitely relate, as there were 4 adults in our house with 1,000 heavenly mandates. Whenever the song came on the radio, I cranked up the volume and channeled my inner diva. Unfortunately, one morning, before we opened, as I sang along in the dining room, I had an unexpected audience, Derek, one of our younger waiters. A member of the old Kung Fu Club, the John Travolta wannabe had a ripped chest that he liked to show off by leaving a button or 2 undone. As I shook my booty and stretched my lips, pink chopstick in hand, he snuck up behind me, and when I turned, he swished his hand from side to side. His limp wrist may not have been a motion in American Sign Language, but the gesture was so well known that even a Chinese waiter from Hong Kong understood what it meant. It meant fag. Thankfully, no one was in the room, and Derek had the memory of a goldfish. He never brought up my dancing again, but his accusation put fear in me. No one in my family ever had said anything anti-gay, not even Grandma, who could spout some pretty offensive things about race and gender. But no one had said anything positive about being gay either. That left a big question mark in my mind. How would they react if it turned out to be true, that I was like that? Back in the early 1980s, the perception of gays and lesbians outside the major cities, pre-AIDS and pre-Pride parades, was much harsher, more toxic than it is today. There were no positive role models in music, television, or film. Homosexuals were lumped in with drug users, alcoholics, and pedophiles. There was no guarantee that things would get better. But despite my resistance and denial and the many cold showers I took, I couldn't ignore my growing attraction to boys. It happened too often to be a fluke or a one-off. Until I could figure out what that all meant, I needed space to sort it through. To buy myself time, I tried my best to blend in. After the close call with Derek, I paid more attention to the way my body moved in the world, how I walked and talked, ate and laughed. I started to notice how others were perceiving me too. While I didn't think I had any effeminate habits, I still tried to butch things up. No more silly dancing to the Queen of Motown. I needed to find a strong, respectable male role model, one who is straight. How are we doing in time? Okay, great. So I'm going to jump ahead. So this particular chapter is about finding male role models, particularly straight Asian male role models. And I think I found one. So my next potential role model came from the big screen. My parents were always too busy working, so I recall them taking us to the movies only once when I was around 10 or 11. My siblings and I were in the back kitchen annoying Grandma just by breathing. After my grandma complained to my dad, he suggested we go catch a show. I had to clean the wax out of my ears for that one. My mom looked up from her bowl of filling. "No, you can't go. We have to stay here." It wasn't that she hated movies. My mom loved them, especially the American ones she had watched with her siblings in Hong Kong. In fact, she named me after an actor in one of her favorite movies, an American drag comedy called Some Like It Hot. The movie starred square-jawed He-Man Tony Curtis eluding an angry group of gangsters by disguising himself in an ill-fitted wig and a frumpy sundress. Basically, she named me after the worst drag queen ever. But as financial director of the family, my mom set the budget. Her priority was education, not entertainment. She never hesitated to take us to the teacher store, but we rarely set foot in Toys R Us or Harmony House. Movie theaters were a mystery too. All the first-run houses were in the suburbs, and even the ticket prices for the second-run theaters in the city were too high for a family of 7. Besides, we had TV, and that was free. My dad stacked up the school books. "It's a weekend matinee. Tickets are half off." My siblings now turned up the pressure. "Please, Mom, we promise to be good." My mom turned to my brother, Chris. He was her sounding board on any potential social activity. My brother, who wasn't a total dweeb, shrugged his shoulders in approval. My mom put down her bowl. "Okay, fine, but when we come back, you have to do extra math problems." We cheered. I even patted Chris on the back. "Star Wars," I screamed. That was a no-brainer for me. This is like the first run of Star Wars. That's how old I am. So the international blockbuster had been out for months, but the kids at school were still raving about Han Solo this, Luke Skywalker that. I might have been late to the party, but I still wanted to join the rebellion. My dad had his own movie in mind. His face lit up. "Let's see Return of the Dragon. It's got Bruce Lee." Bruce Lee? No friggin' way, I thought. That guy was the worst. I hadn't heard his name in years, but in my old elementary school, the black and white boys used to, as a punchline to every joke. Whenever they taunted me with their pseudo-karate chops, they invoked his name. "Show us your kung fu, Bruce. How high can you kick, Bruce? Crack this pencil with your flat face, Bruce." Unfortunately, everyone was just happy to get out. Overruled, I grudgingly joined my siblings in the back of our van. The film was playing at the Fox Theater on Woodward Avenue. Built in the 1920s, the movie palace that once hosted live stage shows with stars like Shirley Temple, Frank Sinatra, and my mom's favorite Elvis Presley now survived on a rotation of Shaft and Superfly. We entered the cavernous interior, which had a strangely oriental motif. The design was amazing, even more ornate than the artwork we had at our restaurant. But there was little time to appreciate this grandeur before the lights dimmed. We grabbed the only open seats, which happened to be in the back row. I got a whiff of buttered popcorn, which smelled way better than the drag of dried chow mein noodles that my mom had snuck in. The movie began, and I slowly became a believer. Every time Bruce creamed one of his opponents, I slapped my knee hard. The whole audience must have agreed as the refreshments went flying. The final bout pitted Bruce's character against his arch rival, played by Chuck Norris. When he snapped his nemesis' neck, the theater burst into cheers. "Get him! Slam him! Honky!" I wasn't used to such loud reaction. I looked around and realized that except for us, everyone in the theater was black. I figured I should just follow the crowd. I jumped up and down. "You show him, Bruce! Teach him who's boss!" My mom yanked me on the shirt. "Sit down or we're never coming back." I tried to stay seated, but I couldn't help myself. The release of these pent-up emotions felt so liberating. Bruce wasn't like Arnold, the wacky Japanese-American diner owner on Happy Days, or Hop Sing from the reruns of Bonanza, or the clueless husband in those Calgon commercials. He was the big dog, and he got to kick ass. I made my family stay through the end credits. Then it was time to head back to study. The sidewalk was packed with moviegoers as we waited for my dad to get in the van. I mimicked some of Bruce's best moves, a chop there, a kick there. Some other fans outside the theater pointed at me and giggled. It felt like deja vu, the start of another playground put-down. I turned to my family for cover, but they were climbing into the van. I closed my eyes, bracing for the barrage of fake hayas. But the hits never came. I opened one eye and saw the expression on one of the boys who was about my age. He was smiling. The tension in my shoulders was dissolved as he and his friends pumped their fists in the air. "Oh man, that movie was sick. You done killed it." Okay, it was kind of racist for them to assume that I had anything to do with the movie. That would have been like me complimenting them for Diana Ross's theme from Mahogany. But it hit me that they were admiring Bruce, not mocking him. He was my man, but he was their man too. In a world with so few brown, black, or yellow stars, maybe it was okay for us to share our heroes. Okay, so that's an excerpt from the book. I'm about to head off on a 30-city tour starting October 17th, hitting everywhere, all the big cities, but also Cleveland, Milwaukee, Detroit, Miami. So if any of y'all want to cover the book, write an article, do an interview, please look me up. I'm at curtisfromdetroit.com. So thank you. Oh, and the book is on sale right now at Barnes & Noble, 25% off. Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you so much, Curtis. I also want to remind everyone watching at home that if you do have questions for our wonderful authors here, you can usually find their profiles on Sketch, which is our convention app. So I know we are running on a tight schedule today, but if you have questions and want to get them asked and answered, just find our authors on Sketch. So thank you, Curtis. Next up, we are happy to welcome Ernest Owens to the stage. Ernest Owens is an award-winning journalist and CEO of Ernest Media Empire, LLC. He is the editor-at-large for Philadelphia Magazine, editor of Eater Philly, president of the Philadelphia Association of Black Journalists, and regional vice president of the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences Mid-Atlantic Chapter. Ernest will be discussing his book, The Case for Cancel Culture. Thank you, Ernest.
Thank you. Good morning. Happy to be here in Philly. I live in Philadelphia, so I welcome you all to this lovely city. And also a little shameless plug. Inside your booklets, there's an insert from Eater Philly. That is my guide to restaurants in Philadelphia to eat. So definitely check it out. All the restaurants on the back are LGBTQ I owned, and they're not in the neighborhood. There's other places. We are all over the city. We're just not in one concentrated area. So I just wanted to put that plug out there. But good morning, everyone. I am the author of this book, The Case for Cancel Culture, which also has a subtitle, How This Democratic Tool Works to Liberate Us All. It's a very fun book. The book came out February 23rd of this year, and I've been on a multi-city tour since then. I'm going to start my third and final leg this upcoming fall in LA. I'll be in LA on October 2nd. For those who live in LA, we'll be at the USC bookstore at 6 o'clock. And I'll also be in Detroit as well, which I'm excited, Chicago, which is where I was born, and other places. The book has been an experience from beginning to end, talking about a very timely topic on cancel culture, something that has been a conversation for many years, and a lot of the conversations and perspectives on it has been, in my opinion, misconstrued and misguided. Oftentimes when we talk about cancel culture, we look at it as something that is to be scared of, and the far right has convinced everyone that anything and everything is being canceled, and that's just not true. This book was written inspired by personal experiences in my life around the topic, but then also leading me into exploring it on a larger context and imagining, what does this mean? Where does this word come from? What are the origins? And this book explores that. That before it was cancel culture, it was PC culture, right? Political correctness. And before that, it was a witch hunt. It was all of these things. And what I noticed is that during times where we saw resistance from Black and brown people and queer people, oftentimes there was a new Oogie Boogie man in response to those uprisings and movements. We're seeing that here with Black Lives Matter, the rise of people pushing against hateful bigotry across the country, and Trump. So now the new word is cancel culture. You look at the 90s, it was PC culture, political correctness, as a response to more diversity and inclusion in college campuses and areas where people were having these conversations, anti-apartheid movements that was happening in that late 80s, early 90s. There was another term they responded to. And what we fail to realize during these times is the people that control a lot of that language is oftentimes cishet, white, Christian American men, right? They oftentimes create this rhetoric and language, and then sadly and oddly, those within our own community and our spaces adapt that language too as a form of integration and ignorance. And we've seen this take place even in this country where you see people who are pretty much going against their own self-interests. You're like, how is it that you're seeing gay people support Trump? How do you see people support policies in communities that they live in that is actually going to increase more crime, more abuse, and everything else? A good example of this is that when the book actually came out, there was an excerpt that was published in Rolling Stone magazine, and it caught the attention of Elon Musk, who tweeted about it the day that I had my book launch party in Philly. And it became very clear to me that he was actually basically proving my point, that the most powerful people in this world hate something called accountability. And that when he had shared it to his millions of followers, based on what I had written that was published in Rolling Stone, that he was actually proving the point that he was upset and frustrated because someone like him, a rich, cishet white man, was being called into account for a lot of the hateful things he was doing to marginalized folks. And so I'm gonna read a brief, very brief excerpt, and I wanna open myself up to questions because I know there might be some interesting questions based off of what I read. So the excerpt was called "Why Cancel Culture is Good for Democracy." History has shown us that those in power are obsessed with turning any form of accountability into a phenomenon that is intended to bring us into sudden doom. For many years, cancel culture has been despised or misconstrued as a new phenomenon that's causing havoc on free speech and expression. We're supposed to now assume that we can't say or do anything without an angry mob instantly judging us and preparing to end our careers before they start. In actual fact, we are the people who make up the so-called mob, and we have control of our own actions. Cancel culture has leveled the playing field for those who can't always rely on the government to protect them. Right now, bigots are protected under the First Amendment to fuel disgusting rhetoric without state-sanctioned consequence. The America that tolerated white supremacy in their policies and laws is the same country that wants to remind us how such forms of hate are still legal via free speech. Cancel culture is the poison to those in power that have benefited from unchecked free speech. When conservatives on Fox News declare that it's a free country and that cancel culture is un-American, they forget that speech works two ways. It allows for discourse to take place, but grants all voices can be heard. In other words, straight white men and other people with power aren't used to getting pushback for the ways they conduct themselves. And cancel culture can't reset the ways society can react. Those who fear cancel culture may claim they fear suppression of speech, but it's accountability that they want to avoid. Prior to social media and social rights advancements, men like Piers Morgan, would likely have gone unchallenged. Today, he is put in a position to have to reckon with his behavior, even if he still gets to remain rich with some level of influence. Cancel culture, as we consider it today, feels new because the previous platforms we have at our disposal. Previous generations were canceling, but the road to accountability was paved with many barriers, both technologically and socially. It was hard to fully cancel something when you weren't granted the same civil rights as your opponent. Even more so when you could face even more persecution and exile for doing it. Once the internet began to take off in the 1990s, society began to see a shift in how the public could consider counseling with less gatekeeping. In 1997, the Supreme Court acknowledged this major shift when it dealt with its first internet-related First Amendment case. The court wrote at the time that, quote, any person with a phone line can become a town crier with a voice that resonates farther than it could from any soapbox. Those who fear cancel culture may claim they fear suppression of speech, but it's accountability that they want to avoid. Thank you. So I'm open for questions on the topic, and I also do the audio voice for the book, so if you like how I sound, you can hear the audio book. I do a podcast as well, but I also do the audio book, and that's available as well. It's on Amazon, it's everywhere books are sold. And I look forward to more people reading it and sharing the word about it. It's a very different topic. I've been on several different cable news channels, from Piers Morgan Uncensored in the UK to Newsmax here in the States. So it's a very interesting topic, and I'm really looking forward to having more discussions and debate in the fall. Hi.
Hello, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Give me your opinion on the advent of cancel culture with respect to what we've seen. I think I can trace it back maybe to the early 90s, where individuals would actually say something and then immediately their people would come back and retract it for them. So they would say, oh, what's the guy, the radio announcer who talked about the African-American women, the basketball women?
Don Imus, yes.
Yes, and then all of a sudden, then he's retracting that. And we kept seeing that. Like somebody would say something, and then 3 days later, their people would come back and they would say, oh, they didn't mean to say that. And we still see it nowadays.
Yeah.
You know, I said this, I wasn't in the right state, it was taken out of context. What is your opinion on the marriage between that behavior and cancel culture, and do you think cancel culture is justified as a slapback to that? Because we see that literally almost all the time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What I would say is that, you know, for my book, I've redefined cancel culture as something that is nonpartisan. It's bipartisan, in my opinion. Everyone does it. Everyone cancels. I think one of the biggest hypocrisies that we've seen this year is that while conservatives are on this war against cancel culture, they've been doing the most canceling, banning books, you know, creating all types of laws that are infringing upon women's right to choose. They have been the biggest proponents of cancel culture in their actual actions. And the funny part is that anyone who tries to counter their oppression, they consider that cancel culture versus what they're actually doing legislative-wise. And so there's a big hypocrisy there. In my book, I define cancel culture as being a situation when a person decides to cancel a person, place, or thing, right, a noun, that they find to be detrimental to their way of life. So for example, if you don't like my book, that's not cancel culture. It's just a matter of taste. And in my opinion, you don't have good taste if you don't like the book. But again, you have that right to, right? That's not cancel culture. Culture is something deeper. There's levels to this, right? And so cancel culture is a situation where, let's say you go to McDonald's, and this is a hypothetical. Let me just put that out there. It's hypothetical. But you go to McDonald's and you say, I don't want to eat McDonald's. I don't like their food. It tastes bad. That's not cancel culture. You just have good taste. But let's say you go to McDonald's and say, you know what, I don't want to go to McDonald's. I don't want to support McDonald's because they don't pay their workers a livable wage. I don't want to go to Chick-fil-A because they support policies that are anti-LGBTQIA. That's cancel culture. And to be further clear, cancel culture is neither a good or bad thing because it's objective. It's the act. It's the ability, the tool to be able to do that, right? And what we have found is that oftentimes people have tried to make this a far right thing, a far left thing, a black thing, a white thing. No, everybody do it. And it's a tool. And I believe, like with tools, it can be weaponized. And so we have seen people weaponize cancel culture to do harmful things. But we've also seen people utilize cancel culture to do important things. And in my book, I talk about R. Kelly, the creator of Mute R. Kelly. I interview the co-founders of the Mute R. Kelly movement that basically led and drove a campaign to get airwaves and people like Tom Joyner and other influential people to stop playing R. Kelly's music, and that led to an investigation, which we have now seen him behind bars. I believe that if it had not been for cancel culture in that type of way, R. Kelly would still be here because he's been doing what he's been doing for many decades. And people allowed him to do it. People tolerated it. The industry tolerated it. People just let it happen. And these black women specifically said enough is enough, and they demanded more, and that's why we don't see R. Kelly or hear R. Kelly as much, right? But that being said, we have to recognize that we also see people do it in different ways. I believe that this type of form of activism, boycotting and whatnot, has given us our rights. I look at Stonewall as a form of cancel culture. These people in that bar that day said enough's enough, and they threw bricks and threw hands. But they felt like that because they had no other option. And in my book, I argue that for many marginalized people that resort to cancel culture, it's because they had no other option left. That was because the conversations they tried to have, the backdoor agreements they tried to work out, the peaceful things that people always act like folks like me don't do, they did. And that didn't work. And so that's when they had to hit the streets. That's why they had to make the petitions. That's why they had to demand more. And we have seen this throughout history. And this book starts from the very beginning of Adam and Eve all the way to the baby saying homophobic things at Rolling Live or Rolling Loud last year, a couple years ago. So this book encapsulates all of those nuances, the good, the bad, the progressives, the conservatives, everyone who cancel, to make people realize that this is a tool that's not going away. Because today we're calling it cancel culture, but tomorrow we might call it accountability culture. But this form of action is going to be with us forever. One more question, sorry.
Hey, thank you for that. My question is concerning the upcoming election. How do you think cancel culture will play into it? Which, if we had to look at sides, will use it more effectively?
Well, I think it's going to definitely be a part of the election. I kind of wrote this book at this critical time because politicians and those who are in power have been marketing campaigns. I mean, the Republican, CPAC is the big Republican conference. They did America Uncanceled as a way to try to, emphasize this. But one important thing I want to note that is the biggest hypocrisy that I think I've heard people say about cancel culture is, oh, this infringement upon free speech and people not being able to go to colleges to give lectures and all that jazz. Here's my response to that. I talked to a constitutional law professor for this book, and one of the things that people always get confused about free speech is that free speech under the First Amendment in the United States protects individuals from legal governmental action and intervention. So if you say something, racist, you can say that in this country, and the government won't arrest you, right? But that's where it stops with the Constitution. It does not actually police the public's ability to respond, to react, right? So if you say something racist or problematic, your free speech is protected in the United States. You're able to say that without being arrested or persecuted under the government. However, the open space of court of public opinion is open. Free speech is a two-way street. You're protected by the government to say what you want, but you're not protected from the public for what you say. And I think some people have misconstrued that the government does not dictate or control how people respond to your free speech. The same way you're able to say what you want to say and not. And so that is coming to a clash right now in society where a lot of privileged white men who for many years was able to say what they wanted because the government wasn't necessarily suppressing their free speech. They were suppressing the free speech of queer people, black people, and folks like me, right, who was not allowed the same civil rights until 1964. So what we're seeing in the society is that as we begin to broaden and expand rights for all Americans, with that comes more people that can be able to dissent. And for the most privileged people who've had the ability to say and do what they want without any consequence, they're now having to adapt in a new society where what they say is going to be met with backlash. You can read more about it in the book. It's available at bookstores everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ernest. Next up, we are going to be welcoming to the stage Jamie Bruesehoff. Jamie is an award-winning LGBTQ+ advocate, a nationally known speaker, and a heartfelt writer. Rooted in her queer identity, her experiences raising a transgender child, and 2 decades of working with youth and families, Jamie equips leaders to create safer, more inclusive spaces for LGBTQIA people of all ages and empowers families like hers to powerfully share their stories to advance understanding. Jamie is here to speak with us today about raising kids beyond the binary, celebrating God's transgender and gender diverse children. Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you. So this book is born out of my experience raising my own child. I have a 16-year-old transgender daughter. She transitioned when she was 8 years old, but also working with families and young people across the country. I come from a faith background. I have a master's in religion from Lutheran Theological Seminary. I've worked as a church professional working with young people in youth ministry and outdoor ministry settings, and I'm married to a Lutheran pastor. And so when Rebecca came out at 8 years old and transitioned, we found we did a lot of education. We educated our family. We educated our community. We educated the small congregation in a rural conservative part of New Jersey where my spouse was serving. Now, I know that rural in New Jersey may not mean what it means elsewhere, but there were cows in my backyard. So. And as our circles of advocacy got wider and wider, advocacy and education, we realized that the most challenging point, and this should come as no surprise to any of us, was that we were not only loving and supporting our transgender daughter, but we were doing so as a family of faith. And so in 2017, we stumbled into very public advocacy when the federal administration rescinded the guidance for transgender students in schools. And my daughter and I, she was 10 at the time, spoke at a rally in Jersey City, and she had a sign that said, "I'm the scary transgender person the media warned you about." And she was wearing her pink puffy coat and her little pink pigtails. We had dyed her hair, and it went viral in every sense of the word. She was coming home from school from 4th grade, and I was like, Teen Vogue wants an interview, Yahoo News, and so on. And so we were kind of catapulted into a very public advocacy that we hadn't necessarily planned for. And that has been an adventure of all sorts, but it's this tension at this intersection of faith and queer identities that has been the pressure point. Overwhelmingly, the most amount of hate my family receives comes in the name of Jesus, and yet our experience on a congregational level and as a family loving and supporting our transgender child was very different. And so, when she transitioned at 8 years old, this was a lot of years ago, 8 years ago, and there were not very many resources for parents, but there were some. I could find books about raising gender nonconforming kids, and I could find heady theology books about queer theology and trans-inclusive theology. As someone in our house, we had 2 master's degrees in religion, but there was nothing that spoke from an affirming theology standpoint for the everyday person trying to love the young person in their midst. And I have yet to be able to find that, and so I wrote it. And so I will read a little bit from the introduction, Church was the only place where I ever told my child that she could not be her true self. My oldest child, Rebecca, is transgender. When she was born, we all thought she was a boy, but she deeply knows herself to be a girl. Before the word transgender ever crossed our minds, we knew Rebecca didn't fit into society's box labeled boy. From the time she was 2 years old, Rebecca loved all things pink, purple, and sparkly. Rainbows and glitter mesmerized her. She loved to put flowery clips in her hair and play dress up. I didn't necessarily care if she had pink toys, but I did have practical concerns. What if we bought her all the pink things? Would she one day wake up and hate pink like most boys? Then what would we do? I couldn't afford to replace it all. Putting aside any potential financial implications and following her lead, the mantra in our family became, colors are for everyone, clothes are for everyone, you can be any kind of boy you want to be. Eventually, we learned terms like gender nonconforming, gender expansive, and our favorite coined by Dr. Diane Ehrensoft, gender creative. These were the words psychologists used when they talked about kids like ours, kids who reject stereotypes and societal expectations around gender roles. At 3 years old, Rebecca loved playing pretend salon and painting each other's nails, an admittedly messy endeavor. In kindergarten, her school notebooks were covered in hearts and peace signs. When she turned 7, she wanted to go shopping and pick out her own clothes, but there weren't any in colors she liked in the boys section. Together, we braved the girls section of Target. I'd never seen her happier as she oohed and awed over all the options, completely oblivious to people's stares. We were navigating the murky territory of supporting our outside-of-the-box kid in a shove-you-in-a-box kind of world. Every time my husband and I had the conversation, the outcome was the same. The world may not be kind, people may not understand. However, letting our child unapologetically show up as themselves in the world was how God called us to parent. It was always a yes. To the nails, the shoes, the dance classes, the clothes, yes. Be any kind of boy you want to be. It was always a yes until Easter 2015. This time was different. She was 8 years old, and this was the first time she'd asked to wear a dress besides the play clothes in the dress-up bin. She wanted to wear a dress to church for Easter Sunday. If you're a churchgoer, then you know Easter is kind of a big deal. In fact, it's such a big deal that it brings out many people who haven't been to church since Christmas. Don't get me wrong, I have no problem with those folks. Growing up, my family were those folks. But it did impact my child's request. There were going to be a lot of extra people at church who didn't know our family nearly as well as the Sunday regulars. This is the part where I should explain I am married to a Lutheran pastor. My spouse is a pastor in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the ELCA. At the time, he was the pastor of a small congregation in a rural conservative part of New Jersey. While our congregation had quietly supported or at least gotten used to our child's gender nonconformity, we did not know how they would respond if our 8-year-old child, whom they knew as a boy, showed up in a frilly Easter dress. We did not know if we would be able to keep our child safe, how to navigate questions, how to run interference on such a busy, stressful, crowded Sunday. So we said no. We said, we know this is who you are, we see you, and we love you, but we just need you to wait. The message we sent to our child was that being who you are at church is scary, and we needed her to pretend to be someone else a little longer. I cannot tell that story or write those words without my stomach churning. I grieve that no. I also know we were doing the best we could at the time, and I can have grace for that. What bothers me the most is that I don't know if I could go back and do it again if I would do it any differently. We weren't wrong. Being a transgender or gender diverse person at church was scary. It's still scary. I grieve a lot from that time. I grieve that we spent 8 years of my child's life not knowing who she was. I grieve that she had to go through so much pain for us to all figure it out. I grieve that she is living in a world that isn't ready for her, a world where people like her are rejected, bullied, harassed, hurt, and killed just because of their identity. I grieve that in the years since that Easter, since she transitioned, she has spent so much time speaking up for inclusion and for her community. There's grief mixed with my pride every time I watch her share her story or speak with legislators. She's incredible, but no child should have to spend their time defending their existence and teaching others how to make space for them. Perhaps most of all, I grieve that showing up in the church fully as herself was one of the hardest parts of her transition for her, for our family. It's not because our congregation was full of terrible people. They are good people, kind, smart, compassionate, and loving, but even good people can do harm by the things they do and those they fail to do. We also cannot ignore that the wider church, the Christian church, has a deeply contentious relationship with transgender people, and Christians continue to do the loudest, most significant damage to the trans and non-binary communities personally and politically. Rebecca did show up at church as herself a few weeks after Easter and every week after that. It was scary and hard. It was also beautiful and life-giving. That first Sunday, I sat in the pew with Rebecca and her siblings. She proudly wore a purple dress adorned with tulle and flowers. I struggled to steady my breathing while my heart tried to jump out of my chest. I went through the motions: stand up, sit down, sing the songs. As we turned to share the peace, I plastered a smile on my face, shaking hands and praying no one would say anything. Peace be with you. By the time worship was over, I was ready to make a run for it. I needed to get out. I needed fresh air. That's when I saw him. My husband was shaking hands with people as they left the sanctuary like he did every Sunday, and one particular member was headed his way. I could tell this man had something to say. He always had something to say, whether it was in church or on Facebook. He said, "Listen, I don't understand this whole transgender thing." I watched my husband brace himself for what was coming. The man continued, "But she used to hide behind your wife and not answer me when I said hi. And today she ran up to me, twirled in her dress, and gave me a high five." He shrugged. "What more is there to know?" That's the good news. We as parents and as the church don't have to have this all figured out. We won't always understand. We have to learn and do the work. But no one is asking for perfection here. We're gonna mess up. We're going to use the wrong words. However, we can be clear that transgender and gender-expansive children are whole and holy. They are not mistakes. They are who God created them to be, and the body of Christ is more fully present when they are here with us. I think the most important two takeaways that I want people to walk away with from the book are, I want parents to know that they don't have to choose between their faith and their child. They may have to choose between their child and their church, but that's a different conversation, and we get there in here. And then the other thing is that for people of faith to understand that silence is complicity, and we have a lot of work to do. We know that people of faith continue to do the most egregious harm to our community, and people of faith need to speak up loudly, boldly, and joyfully to declare that trans and non-binary young people are children of God, created in the image of God to be who they are. It's really important to me to note that Senator Sarah McBride wrote the foreword to the book, and my daughter Rebecca wrote the afterword. As a cis person, a queer person, but a cis queer person, writing this, it was critical to me that this be, my words be couched between the words of trans people, because that is not my experience. I also had trans sensitivity readers and other perspectives, especially from the BIPOC community, to make this as representative and as useful and as accurate and helpful as possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jamie, for sharing that with us. So next up on the lineup is Bryn Nelson. Unfortunately, Bryn cannot be with us here today. Bryn is an award-winning science and medical writer and a former microbiologist trained in bacterial biochemistry. The book he was going to be sharing with us today is Flush, The Remarkable Science of an Unlikely Treasure. We will not be hearing from Bryn today, but you can find more information about him online. So next up, we are excited to welcome H.L. Sudler to the stage. H.L. Sudler is the author of 6 books, has served as a magazine publisher, a newspaper editor, and a contributing writer to numerous anthologies and periodicals. He was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, so welcome home, H.L., and currently lives in Washington, D.C. He will be sharing his book, Patriarch, My Extraordinary Journey from Man to Gentleman, the 10th anniversary edition. So welcome, H.L.
Hello. So guess what? I am not going to talk about Patriarch because, like you, I got on the train this morning, packed everything and its mother, except the book. So that, yay, that's me. That's me all over. So I do want to do something else. And I did it recently at the Kennedy Center. I did it someplace in Maine where I teach creative writing. I'm going to recite to you a poem that I wrote. And this poem is really, really, I think, rather important because of the reason why I wrote it. I am recently divorced after 13 years with my husband, and that left me with a whole lot of time on my hands and seeking out new ways to fill my life. I am traditionally a novelist and a screenwriter and an essayist, but I don't write poetry. I am not a poet. However, in trying to redirect my life post-divorce, I wound up volunteering a great deal and wound up volunteering for a lot of pride events in Washington, D.C., where I now live. What I found out post-pandemic at these pride events was that I guess everybody wanted to come out and be seen, and in Washington, D.C., we had the greatest number of participants for a pride event that we had ever had, and this is Washington, D.C., and when I do comparative shopping, I think of San Francisco and New York, who come, ready with pride events, large numbers of people. But this time, Washington, D.C. was fantastic in its numbers, and the very next day at its festival, doubled that numbers from 250,000 on Saturday to nearly 500,000 people surrounding the Smithsonian area all day for a pride event. When I looked out, I saw this community, the LGBTQ plus community, and I was so moved by what I saw and the diversity of people that were there that I immediately went home and wrote a poem based on a question that people ask me all the time. And so I decided not only to write about this question, but to answer the question. Someone got a hold of the poem and asked me to read it at the Kennedy Center, and so I did. And I would like to share that with you now. That book there is a book of essays. It's about me and my father after my father died back in 2000, and the strained relationship that we had post his divorce from my mother, me coming out to him, us coming to some sort of agreement that you thought that I was going to walk around and embarrass you, but I turned out just like you, a workaholic, and you taught me how to be a gentleman just by being. But he was a regular Joe sort of guy, and that's what that book is about, my learning how to be a man and a gentleman just by watching him. But right now, I'm going to read you this poem. It's called Stay, and I hope you like it. And that's that. People often ask me, why do you stay when you're the only black guy at the table, when you're the only Afro-Latino anyone can readily think of, when you're the only gay guy I know who isn't afraid to walk with his head held high, brazen, autonomous, willful. Why do you stay? People often ask me, why do you stay in a community that is still fragmented, where the whites are over here and the blacks are over there and the women are back there and the people of color are somewhere and the trans are being killed and the kids are in hiding and the seniors are forgotten, and there are people who actually say out of their mouths that they are not proud to be gay. Why do you stay? People often ask me, why do you stay in a country you say is the greatest, but everyone seems to hate you, the laws are against you, and freedoms are rolling back, and people want to kill you, and they don't want you near their kids, and they're disowning you and hunting you and praying for your demise and looking for ways to punish you and demean you and deprive you and disparage you and erase you from any past, present, or future history? Why do you stay? I think a moment and I offer them this response. I stay because there's a word that I hate, so much so that I never use it except this one time for you. That word is minority. There is nothing minor about me. I stay because I am proud of who I am and what I am and why I am what I am, of the life I have lived, of the place in history I have earned, of my successes that can be seen as inspirational and aspirational. I stay because of the work that needs to be done by someone. Seeds covered with tears, covered with sweat, covered with blood, seeds that need to be planted, that will birth roots like hands and that will punch up from the ground a tree wide and tall and magnificent, a tree that will give great shade and comfort, a tree with singing birds and wide leafy branches and delicious fruit to nourish the body and soul. A tree seen from miles away, and that will say to residents and visitors alike, this is our Eden. I stay for them. The butch lesbian, the trans kid, the non-binary Jew, the Muslim afraid of an honor killing, and the whites, and the blacks, and the Asians, and the Latinos, and the indigenous, and the bis, and the femmes, and the seniors, and the bears, and the migrants, and the late bloomers, and the young ones afraid of speaking their truth, and the drag queens, teaching kids the love of literature, and the fishes out of water, and the rainbow souls in cultural deserts, the depressed and repressed and suppressed, the rejected and ejected, the homeless and the sick and the poor, our brothers and sisters who, when they look up seeking stars, see only black night. I want them to train their eyes well, for I am a star hidden there. And with other stars, I have helped to plant and care for and grow this tree, leaving this space better than the way I found it. It is our home. It is our Eden. It is our haven. It is our birthright. I want them to see me, this star, and in their mind's eye, I want them to see this community, beautiful and diversified, where they will be welcomed and protected and loved. I want them to see me, this star, and I want them to make a wish. This is why I stay. This is why you should stay, too. Thank you.
All right, thank you, HL, for that very powerful reading. So next up, we are welcoming to the stage Lana Patel. Lana will be presenting on behalf of book interviewer Peggy Gillespie. She will be speaking about authentic selves, celebrating trans and non-binary people and their families. Lana is one of the interviewees featured in the book. Lana is an Indo-Afro-Caribbean trans woman from New York City, currently residing in Los Angeles. She is the PR and Government Affairs Liaison for Plume, a groundbreaking telehealth company serving the trans, gender nonconforming, and intersex community. So welcome, Lana.
Hi, everyone. It is a pleasure and an honor to be with you all this morning. And I have the honor of representing Peggy Gillespie, who put together this incredible book, Authentic Selves. I wanted to read a few excerpts from the book and also provide some words from Peggy and speak about my journey and why it was so important for me to be a part of this book. And so, Peggy, some of her words were that the advice that a lot of these parents have in the book will warm your heart. And there's so many stories from these incredible trans, gender nonconforming, intersex folks in this book that just talk about unconditional love and the support that you need to provide your child. There's one sentence in the book she says that makes her cry. And she thinks that it'll be very affirming for so many folks and so many families. I will say that for me, as someone who's been on this journey and this path as a first generation American to Caribbean parents that grew up with very myopic views of gender and very binary views of gender and sexuality, to be in this place right now is, for me, one, groundbreaking, but not to toot my own horn, but it's also something I just never dreamt would be possible. I come from a culture where, trigger warning, but hate crimes, honor killings are very common. People feel like, people like myself, LGBTQ folks, are an abomination to humankind, that we should be erased. And I never thought my family would ever accept me, let alone be in a book with me and to do this journey with me. It was a long time coming. My mom came around in 2018, almost 19, December. So this is fairly new. Like, we're just, getting to a place of like rebuilding our relationships and moving forward. This book is also blessed by Jazz and Jeanette Jennings and has the backing of PFLAG. And PFLAG was one of those really affirming places for me when I moved to California eventually from Florida. So a little bit about me. Born and raised in New York, moved to Florida at 13, navigated high school, transitioned there, had to basically take matters into my own hands, went to 3 different medical providers looking for hormone replacement therapy, HRT, as we call it during the time. Was turned away all 3 times, and they told me, the last one said, I don't provide female hormones to 16-year-old boys. Maybe you can go to Tampa or Miami where they do that there. I lived in Polk County, which is the largest county in Florida. It's very central, but it's also very conservative, and if not repressive. It's ultra right. So at 17, I found myself self-medicating on black market hormones, and I self-medicated for the first 5 years of my transition. And during the first year, my parents found out that I was transitioning, and my stepfather then shaved my head bald, forced me to detransition, and I had to live a double life, being a girl outside, being a boy in the house, keeping my head shaved, wearing boy clothes, and being misgendered, and trying to navigate working a full-time job and going to school full-time where everyone knew me as a girl at that point. And so this journey now to like go from that point to now like having them proudly be on this journey and contribute to the book has just been phenomenal. There's a couple quotes that my parents have in the book that I wanted to read, and I thought they really resonated with me, and I hope that they resonate with you all as well. My mother's quote and her advice was, I want other parents to know that you should accept your kids for who they are, keep an open mind, take it one day at a time. And my stepfather, who's in the book with my mom and I, says, I want other parents to know that it could be a life or death decision if you don't handle it right. Love your child, carry the same love you had when they first came out of the womb and you first saw them. And the last line in our chapter is, the bottom line is that Lana is our daughter, and we love her. Lana is ambitious, artistic, articulate, very intelligent, and humble. I like to kid around with Lana, and we laugh together a lot. And I'm so glad to be in a place in our relationship where we can look back on the trials and tribulations and laugh on things. Initially, when the offer for the to be a part of this project came, I have a fellow South Asian trans sister, Feroza Saeed, who's also in the book, and she presented it to myself and to the president of my organization, Parivar, Anjali Remy, who's on the cover with her mom with a sari. And I was super excited to be a part of this opportunity. And once I got to meet Peggy and learn more about this project, I thought it was incredible to have a book of stories so people know, we're stamping history so the next generation knows that this exists, that we've existed, and that families are capable of loving their queer and trans youth. And especially in this political climate with over 400 anti-LGBT legislation that's been put out just this year, I think it's so imperative to continue letting folks know that there are people who love and support us. And with that, I will leave it open for any questions.
Any questions? All right, thank you so much, Lana. Thank you to everyone who shared their books with us here today. Thank you for the small glimpses that we had into your books. They all sound really exciting. My Goodreads to read list definitely got longer. If you heard something today that piqued your interest, we encourage you to add it to your reading list and tell your friends. Once again, thank you to all of our authors. If those watching at home would like to contact them, many of them have profiles on Sketch. You can also find them on social media. But with that, we will wrap up our 2023 Authors Cafe. Thank you, everyone.